What's the best way to build a brand? Do you reveal it? Do you uncover it like you're peeling away the layers of an onion? Or do you build it from the pieces that you find around the company? Is it something more bottoms up, grassroots, where you're grabbing that authentic voice of the people? Or is it more top down, where leadership has a lot to say about where the company's going and what the company's all about? In this, the 8th episode of The Brand Plan, Marcus and I don't even come close to answering that question. Instead, we unpack it. We look at the different sides and the different options so that you're better equipped when you're ready to have a strong employer brand conversation.
You're listening to The Brand Plan, the podcast about the intersection of talent, brand, and strategy, with your hosts Marcus Body of 33 and James Ellis of Employer Brand Labs.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey, James. How's it going?
Good. How's your week been?
It's been good. We've had an interesting week here. I've been speaking at a seminar we had about talking to inclusive audiences through our Unbox series of events, which has been that was a fun thing earlier in the week.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. You've got the series archives. I see articles to pull out of. I love the framing, and I'm coming from the outside, so I don't know all the thinking behind it. But as I'm reading it, it seems and seeing it's how to think beyond the box. How do you pull DEI thinking outside this box, which I think is a great way of saying how do you unposterize it? How do you uncheck boxify it? And I think there's some really good stuff. So I highly recommend that anybody who's interested in the subject definitely check that out.
Absolutely, and it's worth saying it's not just me. You actually get to hear some other 33 people as well, so that's a good thing too.
Well, it balances out. It's a good mix. Cool. So this week, the subject we've kind of put forth is complicated. It's messy. It's a little amorphous, strange, right? On this podcast, I don't know, who would have guessed it? But I want to couch it this way. So when I talk to other employer branders, talent acquisition leaders, HR people who are either thinking about developing or buying the development of an employer brand, people who are actively seeing, hey, how do I get from point A where I don't really have an employer brand to point B where I think I'll have an employer brand, it'll do me a lot of good, and we can talk about that at some point. The way to cross that chasm, there's two paths. And the first path is this sense of revelation. You're revealing something about the company that either everybody sees or everybody knows and simply crystallizes it, isolates it, amplifies it, and says, that's the one thing you need to be known for. Alternatively, the brand development is something you build like an erector set or a kit or like Legos. You're like, okay, I'm going to take a thing that's the legal team sit over here and the thing the founder wrote in the SEC filing over there and the thing, and they glue it together and you kind of put it together and you click, and it's like, it's this thing. It's like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it almost is a brand new thing. So today, let's talk about those two paths. If there's a third path, if there's a middle ground, and I suspect there's a call for in case for all of them. But that's really what the subject is. It's kind of like, call it development versus revelation.
Completely. I think it's a really worthwhile discussion, and one where I think a lot of people get lost because they're not quite sure what they want to do. And I think sometimes we have ways of labeling these things that make it very clear how we feel about them. So I think if you go right at one end of things, you've got that revelation one where you're going to kind of say what is good right now. And I quite often refer to this as the crowdsourced EVP. This is the one where we're going to ask everyone, what do you like? And you're going to summarize that as best as you can. And the advantage of that is it feels quite bottom up. And when people feel good about this, they'll call this the bottom-up EVP because that's kind of what they're doing. They're crowdsourcing it. They're going, right, we're going to ask everyone what they think and then we'll crystallise that. And there are lots of times when that's a good thing to do, but we'll get into some of the problems with it, I think, shortly.
Yeah.
The other one is where you go, right, we're not going to crowdsource it. We're going to declare a kind of a destination that is based on who we are as a business and say, that's a brilliant thing to be part of, isn't it? And you're going to sell it to people. And it's more like a political manifesto. This is the kind of employer we believe in being, and it's on purpose and it's deliberate. It's not the things that you happen to like. These are the things that we intended to be, and it's more a kind of thing from the organisation to employees and potential employees saying, this is what we've got on offer. And, again, the people who don't like that will often call that a top-down one, because they want to dismiss it and go, oh no, isn't bottom up much better? But actually there are times when that is the right, absolutely definitely the right thing to do, is to do that kind of declaration of, we're doing this, do you want to be part of that?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the way to think of it is, are you doing the best of what there is right now and kind of trying to capture that, or are you doing what you are trying to be and trying to capture that? And there are perfectly good reasons why you might go one way or perfectly good reasons why you might go the other way. I have done both types of EVPs and I've been very happy with both of them at that time for that client. I think what gets messy is if you're not sure which one you're doing, you'll probably end up doing neither.
Yeah, and you end up kind of gluing two approaches together, and you feel like maybe it's a pincer movement. I'm doing top down and bottom up at the same time, and I'll meet in the middle, and you're like, does that work?
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm sure it does work, but I feel like that's an opportunity there's more moving parts to go wrong. There's more opportunities for you to kind of make a misstep, and suddenly the whole thing falls apart. And to me, an employer branding project, initiative, whatever you want to call it, it is a delicate machine, especially early on. One, nobody understands what the heck it is. Two, no one understands why it is or what it's supposed to be doing. Three, it's almost always informed or paid by someone over there, whether it's a leader I don't ever talk to or an exec who decided to get they read an article and they decide it's a thing. It feels like it's a mess. And so getting the information you need to develop it and figuring out how to do so in a way that doesn't feel bothersome or irksome or onerous to people where they're like, what is this garbage why am I in this meeting? Like that to me is the biggest, the red flag of if someone's having the thought of why am I in this meeting? I've made a funny turn and I need to kind of rethink my steps. And if you have both approaches, you can there's so many more ways to mess this up.
But you get the same tension in other projects as well. You also get the same tension in a values project. Are we defining the values of what we do now? Are we defining the values of what we should be doing? You get the same thing in a competency framework project. Yeah. Are we defining the competencies that people are getting on for, or the ones that they should be getting on for? And there are all sorts of, people projects where you get this tension of, are we talking about the best of what's right now, or are we talking about where things should be? And whether that's an EVP project, a values project, a kind of behaviour project, a culture project, you need to have that conversation about what does kind of good look like. If you do the best of now thing, the question that gets asked later on in the project, and a moment of panic comes when someone says, how do we future-proof this?
Yeah.
And the answer is, of course, because you built something so built in how things are right now, it isn't future-proof. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Versus the other one, if you've done the very future-looking way of doing things and the where are we going things, then the question that gets asked near the end of the project that causes all sorts of problems is, yes, but is this authentic now? And the answer is, of course, it isn't entirely, because it's about where we're going. It's not where things are right now. So there isn't a correct answer. I think there are certainly things that should steer you towards doing one rather than the other, that, are questions you can get into about your organisation.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about it, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, I have this goofy theory where it's a little bit like an artificial coral reef. You drop these pylons and maybe some big old concrete pillars or some, so I know in Miami, sometimes they drop school buses they've cleaned up. Right, you put them in the ocean to say, look, it's a place to grab hold. So to me, the pylon is that sense of this is where I want the intention. This is where I want the brand to be. And then you allow it to exist as the now shows up and says, okay, of the 4,000 things I could be doing, of the 10,000 things I could say about this company, you want us in that direction? Great. I'm going to start to filter. And completely. It's almost bonsai tree-esque where you're trimming away the stuff that doesn't quite fit and you're reinforcing the growth of the stuff that does, and slowly it evolves in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think you one of the things you'll notice that kind of is a difference between the two different schools of EVP is one of them has some very predictable contents. The one about what people like now, I can predict 80% of what yours is going to be. I could do a sort of Rorschach ink blot version of this that most companies would happily use. And it says something about training and development. It says something about teamwork and collaboration. It says something about inclusion and belonging. And it probably says something about impact. And that's not wrong. Those are all important things at your organisation. And those are the things that people like about jobs. And so if you ask your staff, what do you like about your job? I often joke with clients, if you ask all of your people, if you do the really crowdsource thing and you say to everyone, what do you like about your job? I will eat my hat if the top answer is not, it's the people.
It is. It's
100%,
the
answer that people
100%.
give you when you say, what do you like about your job? Actually, even if that isn't true, even if actually what they really love about their job is their own kind of personal impact, because that sounds so massively egotistical to say that. They won't say that. They'll say the thing that makes them sound nice, which is, "Oh, I love the people I work with," and because they want you to like them, even when you're running a focus group, or even when it's a survey that the person asking the question isn't even there in the room. People give the answer that they think they should give, or that reflects well on them.
Yeah.
And so they're all going to say it's the people.
Just while we're doing that. Yeah, well, because I think I think we should do a whole episode on this idea. But since we're sitting here,
Yeah.
I agree. That question of what do you like working here is just such a waste of time. What is your better replacement for that question? What's the thing you ask to get people beyond that?
You need a comparative thing. So you need why should always, if there's an obvious competitors, why should someone work here rather than there?
That's helpful.
Is a much better question.
Yeah.
Because they'll go, oh, actually, it's about this. Because we've got people and they've got people. You can't say it's the people anymore. Or you might do. They might say, actually, it is the people. The people here behave completely differently to the people there because of X, Y, and Z. And so you might then uncover a better answer that started with it's the people. But because you've now drawn a comparison point, they now have to sort of justify their answer a little bit better. So it's a kind of better opening gambit. But even so, this is always the problem with the crowdsourced bottom-up approach, is that this is a new idea for everyone taking part in that. So they're going to come up with a lot of cliches because they don't know that they're cliches, because they don't do this all the time.
Yeah,
and
they don't have a frame of reference. They've had 3 jobs before. Yeah, they've had 3 jobs before. They don't know about the 20 million other businesses. They have no frame of reference.
Exactly. Or, some of them, their frame of reference is so hilariously, bad. They might have had a terrible previous employer, in which case, there's like, what do I love about working here? Oh, I'm not being actually physically mistreated by my manager. Okay, that's great, but you're not going to put it in the EVP model. and this is always the problem when you go the crowdsourced. The other thing you can get into problems with if you go the crowdsourced bottom-up approach is they might say things that happen to be true, but that aren't going to be true in the future. So they might go, oh, we love how decentralized this business is. And you go, oh dear, because I was talking to the leadership and they were talking to me about the efficiency project that's coming in September. Oh dear, what everybody likes is definitely, if we get the business plan right, isn't going to be true anymore. Yep. Or it can be something that's just fantastically incidental, like the catering's brilliant. And you go, okay, the catering's brilliant. Are we going to put that in the EVP? You might do if there's nothing else to say. Actually, come and work here, the catering's fantastic. But you're going to have a problem getting that through leadership. If you go to the leadership team and say, right, we've done a huge research project about why people want to work here, and the answer is the catering, the senior leadership are going to be very offended by that answer, and they might not sign it off, even if it's right.
Even if it's right. So, and honestly, that's a good one because it's easy to ramp up. It's easy to amplify. It's easy to invest in. It's easy to differentiate. Like on paper, it's got legs. It works. But yeah, you're right. To the leadership, they're like, wait, I built a company for lunch? What the heck was this?
I've done a fantastically successful contact center campaign in the past where actually we knew our best selling point was that they had better car parking than any of the competitors, right? And we knew it was definitely a massive sell, and we did lean on it quite hard as we could, but without making it the headline of the ad, because we didn't. You can't do an massive ad campaign with a headline of "We've got free car parking," but we knew it was a pretty big motivating factor for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what a work from home campaign is? It's the lack of commute. I mean, that's 90% of it right there.
Yeah. If you worked here, you'd be home already. It's that kind of thing. So I mean, I think the upside of it, though, the reason, I feel like I've done quite a lot of kicking of the bottom up. So let's talk about what's good about the bottom up is getting that engagement and that involvement. And sometimes the answer is, what else have you been doing recently? And have you engaged with the workforce on anything? And if you haven't engaged with your workforce for like 5 years in a meaningful way, that might be a good reason to do a bottom-up thing. It's simply as an engagement project. And the fact that it happens to be to do with EVPs and employer branding is, incidental to that. It's, gosh, we haven't done a listening exercise in a long time. Whereas if you've just done a massive company-wide values project, I'd say the last thing you want to do is say, and now can everyone come back into a focus group to do something else? It's going to go down really badly if you say, if you've had 2 massive consultation exercises this year, especially if one of those was about something negative, like a redundancy process or something, the last thing you want to do is then start consulting people again. They won't play with it. So you're not going to be able to do it that way. And you're going to have to find a different way of doing it. But I mean, there are perfectly good, valid reasons to do that.
Yeah, I find that invariably I will run across what I refer to as the accidental poet. I will run into and bump into this person who just says these things, and they don't realize that they're throwing me gold. They don't realize that they've encapsulated these experiences and these perspectives in such a way that I'm like, I was when I was working in a biotech, I was somebody, you ask the standard question, what's it like to work here? And you usually expect the standard answer of, well, it's different every day. And their response actually was, well, every single day has this incredibly high variance. I went, well, gosh, just the language and choice of words there speaks volumes of what this company is. And it creates that sense of this is how we're different, which ultimately is what we're trying to do.
But you can still achieve that with a kind of top down thing by doing some consultation with your model once you've got one.
Yeah.
So you can still go and dig for that gold. And I agree, some of the best ones I think one of my favorite ones I've ever had is I was doing some work years ago with Johnson and Johnson, and we knew that they needed to say something about product quality. They, market leading products. We are one of the best at what we do in all sorts of fields. And I was in a focus group full of finance staff in their UK headquarters, and we were talking about how we should phrase this thing because product quality sounds a bit boring.
Yeah.
And this accountant said, yeah, I mean, I do believe in our products. I remember I was delighted when I found out my grandma's knees were J&J. And I thought, wow, that is, actually, I am grateful that my company's components are inside my grandparents. That is an absolutely golden quote.
End of meeting.
Quality.
You're done.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And this is why we also focus group finance and business services. They are opinions and have opinions and are people too.
And have amazing perspectives on this stuff that, most people are like, oh, I'm coding, or oh, I'm being a nurse, or I'm saving lives, or whatever that thing is. Coming from an operational point of view, it provides such a valuable perspective. And the language around that perspective is always interesting.
I think the thing that I always say about people who work in kind of business services things, like finance, marketing, HR, all the things that exist in every business is these people are interesting because they can work for anyone.
True.
They can go and work in healthcare. They can go and work in an arms manufacturer. They can work at a candy company. They can work in anything at all. There are jobs for these people, and therefore, why they've come to work for you is very interesting. Whereas the people who do what you do as a business had fewer choices. They were already in your sector or somewhere close to it, so they have a differently interesting thing.
They totally do. The challenge there is it's easy to over-index on that outsider perspective. And that's why I think so many pharma companies are all like, come work for us, we save lives and we innovate. You're like, yes, that's every single pharma company. That's a reason why your legal team showed up, because it's like your choice was sue other people or save lives. I feel really good about this choice. If you're talking to a biochemist, their choice, no matter what they do, is save lives, assuming they don't go into arms manufacture in a particularly illegal kind of way.
And it's worth thinking through within your business, how big are those populations? And therefore, I remember, I've already mentioned before, years ago, I did an EVP for CERN, and you could easily get carried away with the particle physics and changing the laws of physics. But I think it was about 3% of their workforce to physicists. Most of their workforce are the people who keep the thing running. So firemen and, mechanics and people who might find that vaguely interesting, but they're not going to do that. That's not what their role is. And so it's really important to kind of think through, what do we do? And as you say, particularly any business that has a particularly benevolent kind of purpose, like healthcare and pharmaceuticals and education, it's very easy to run the ad that all of your competitors could run.
Yes.
It's safe for the kids. Yeah. Okay, that's fine, but every single one of your competitors could say that. It's not going to work against any of your competitors.
Yeah.
It's not wrong, but it's not going to help you very much.
Yeah, that is why I bang the drum of it's not about showing why your company is good. It's about showing why your company is different. To find that differentiated value is the crux of what we're trying to do. I will say, getting back to the positives of a bottom up kind of approach, is that it tends to smooth over the concerns that this stranger, a la you and I and other people who do this kind of work, is trying to tell me why I work at my company, right? There's always
Yeah.
that resistance of who are you? And I just delivered an employer brand 2 weeks ago, and I'm reading it out, and they're like, "Oh, this is really good. This really sounds
Yeah.
like us." I'm like, "It should." I didn't write a word of this.
Yes.
I just cherry picked phrases from other people and stitched them together, such as that this is actually a really clear narrative. You just are seeing it in bits and pieces and pockets. I'm just kind of coalescing it together.
Yes.
And it does make it feel like, yes, that sounds like us. There's that authentic, that grit of this is the reality. It feels like someone who's experienced the work. Where the top
Yes.
down, it's a different kind of beast. And honestly, the stakeholders you're trying to serve shift depending on the approach. If you're trying to do a bottom up, you have to make the bottom happy first. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Your career site is a kind of litmus test for your entire talent strategy. It should pique the interest and engage the people you most want to hire. Does your career site connect your company to the people you are trying to attract? Is it tailored to what candidates want to learn and how they want to learn it? Have you even updated it in the last year or two? If it's time to rethink your career site and make it a more strategic element in your recruiting plan, stay tuned.
I mean, I think that's all true. I think there are ways you can do it with the top-down approach that kind of mitigate some of those drawbacks.
But not, they're not starting there. Yeah.
But I think so. Let's start to do the segue towards the top-down one then. So I think there is one thing that if I hear it immediately makes me think there is going to be a huge problem with the bottom-down thing, and that's as soon as someone says the words change program, or new business plan, or if someone tells me fairly early on, our business is changing, right? Yeah. And that's happened that's been a big thing in the last 5 years for very, very obvious reasons, is we've gone into a project and said, shall we ask everyone what they like about working here? And the immediate answer's been, well, no, because what they liked about working here was the pre-COVID thing, and that's not coming back, and we have no intention of going back there. So even if that's why they joined us, it's not true now and it's never going to be true again. Or, the world has changed, we are moving on. So actually, that's not an option to ask people, what do you like now? Because their answer is going to be, it is inherently slightly backward looking. They will immediately start thinking about, why did I join? If something has materially changed about your business since that happened, then you're in real trouble. Because actually what you end up codifying is why someone should have joined your company 5 years ago.
Exactly.
Not why they should be joining it now. And that immediately starts me thinking, right, we probably can't go, at the very, very definitely we can't go fully bottom up, but quite possibly we can only go, we will want to engage with the front line, but we'll need to have something first to show them that says, this is where the company's going. What do you like about that?
Yeah,
this
reframe
is
the
what we might
situation.
be able to say in the future. How do you feel about that? Because otherwise, what you'll actually end up doing is codifying like the
past.
The grief, the nostalgia for how things were.
Yeah.
And inevitably people, I talk to a lot of clients about this where they go, oh, everybody thinks everything used to be better. And it's like, this happens at every client I work with. Everyone's convinced everything
company
was better 5 years ago. But part of that, especially for people who've been with you for a serious amount of time, so more than 5 years, what they're forgetting is they become more senior. And as you become more senior, your job gets a bit more boring and a lot more meeting-y. And the job probably was more fun when you started. It was a lot less well paid, but it was probably more fun when you started. Yeah. And everyone forgets that. And they'll go, oh, it used to be better in the old days. And it's like, no, there are probably still people at the bottom having fun. It's just you're not there anymore. On the upside, you've got a company car. So, but people don't remember that they have changed roles as well in that time.
And I think that act of managing executive memory, for lack of a better term, is part of this game, because I've met, now I deal a little more startup-y side. So, I deal with a lot of owners who they still vividly remember the day they were 3 people. They still vividly remember. Like, look, let's be fair. Jeff Bezos loves to show that picture of him with a door on some sawhorses. Remember me? And you're like, yeah, dude, I don't know who that dude is because I've seen your picture now and I see how you live now. Those might as well have been 2 different universes, let alone 2 different lifetimes as a single person. And too many leaders still kind of have that fondness for how it used to be back when it was fun, to your point. And when you ask them to describe what they like about the company or where the company's going, what they should we talk about the company, they are also describing a company of 5 years ago when it was fun for
Completely.
them, when it was, exciting and they could be kind of, run and gun and kind of, very agile, and they can make the change and pivot on a dime. That was fun for them because they were really excited. And now it's just, okay, how do we deal with the lawyers and how do we deal with it? Like, that's not as fun a job. And it's very hard to disconnect that memory and say, great, put that in the book, put that in the video of the history of this company, because today and tomorrow, which is, by the way, why we're taking this top-down approach, where is this company going?
So one of the things I do whenever I'm doing a more top-down one, where typically I'll start by saying, can I speak to the people who run your company? And, whatever their job titles are, they might be partners, they might be managing directors, they might be, it's that kind of level of people. I'll always ask them, right, who have you got on your workforce now? In the future, are you going to want more of the same people like that, or is that changing? And is the type of person you're going to get changing? So, like a lot of clients I've worked with in the last 5 years, they've said, oh yeah, no, we used to hire people who did this thing. Of course, in the future, that's going to be done by an AI. So I'm going to need people who do more of this kind of thing. And that they're already thinking at that kind of level. And it means, okay, so that actually the EVP and the brand that we are going to build, actually our internal audience isn't a great test base for it, because some of them will make that transition, but some of them won't. And some of them are not going to be the right people in the future, because the job itself is actually going to change so fundamentally as the business changes. Or, I've worked with retailers where things were shifting massively to online, even pre-COVID. And it's suddenly like, okay, so actually the kind of staff you need is no longer the person who's really good at being chatty in a store, because they're not going to be in a store.
Yeah.
They might well be, engaging with people through a digital chat, where actually that banter is a lot less possible and a lot less kind of appropriate. Okay, it's going to change fundamentally who you need to hire, their personality type. So the reasons that someone's going to come and work for you are going to change as well. Okay, we're going to have to do something a little bit speculative about where we're going, not codifying where we are now.
But the fun there is you get to say, okay, I see where we are now. You're telling me where you're going to be now. Now you've affected the EVP project is now a change management project. It's how we're getting from point A to point B in a way that most EVP employer brand projects don't have that kind of knowledge of its purpose and knowledge of a goal, right? Most employer brand projects are, we need better people, we need a better kind of person, whatever that thing is. It's kind of amorphous, kind of fuzzy, and you do really hard work to kind of apply some metrics to it. And we're going to talk about metrics soon, I know.
Certainly are.
Not today, just everybody calm down, stick around with us. Metrics are future episodes, but they're coming. But to know that the brand is here to help you go from a company where it was all about let's hire chatty people and friendly people to a place where we're going to be a leaner, meaner company because we're now serving different audiences and we're building different things.
Exactly.
That puts the brand project in a different position. It really allows them to say, look, this isn't just about, because let's be fair, a lot of people treat employer brand as the lipstick you're putting on a pig, that it's more about, this is a fundamental change. This is how we're creating, this is the lever by which we make this fundamental change.
And I think the challenge that many of you will have is the same challenge that we have as consultants, is what you have and haven't got changes from business to business. And so, certainly when I start working with a client where I know we're going to be in this kind of future territory, we have to fairly early on go, does anybody know that already within the business? Has there already been a future of work project? And if so, can we get the full report, not the summary, the whole thing? Has there already been some debate within the leadership team about what the future looks like? Do you know that or not? Is this going to be new to them? Actually, sometimes they might go, yep, actually, that's already been codified into a strategy. The strategy's been used to create a people plan. The people plan's been used to create a workforce planning thing. And right, you might be a long way down the line of knowing what the future looks like.
Yeah.
Or you might not. You might be very early on in that process, in which case you become part of that process. You become a significant part of that process of working out what the future of the business looks like. And actually, that's much more fun, that project. That is a kind of much more fundamentally interesting thing to do. And you can end up doing something really very important within your business if you are helping to codify, where are we going? What are we changing? And how are we going to manage people and why? And what's our intention there, rather than just what happens to be the case right now?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting project to do. And the
Yeah.
EVP you end up with at the end of it becomes a lot more distinctive because it's around your business and your business plan rather than
They're intertwined.
environmental stuff, which is true for every single one of your competitors. It is
Yeah.
going to be a bit more specific.
Yeah, I've never had that situation happen with myself. I know that as I deliver work, it starts those conversations, right? It's
Yeah.
the spark that gets leadership and executives to say, is that where we're going to? Is that where we want to go? And where sometimes they see that brand as this is a interim solution to get us to a good spot where we can make better decisions and start to develop the foundation, yada yada. I've never gotten to be part of those decisions, and I know that had I been in those decisions, and honestly, when I was in the agency side, which I think is interesting, how our agency lives are different.
Yeah.
My thinking around agency was always I was the guy with my nose pressed up against the glass, looking at the leaders make these decisions. I'm like, I can help you make these decisions better, but you don't invite us in because agencies are expensive and they want to keep them on the outside. When in fact, the agencies have such great and outsiders and have such great perspective to help inform or at least ask better questions to say, this may, is this the right approach? Is this solving the problem you want to solve? Or is this just an article you read and thought this was kind of cool?
I mean, it also hugely depends from business to business how likely that is to happen. So typically, if I'm working with a big consumer business, that doesn't tend to happen a lot because if someone is participating in that conversation, it's their consumer brand agency who are playing that role. Whereas, actually, it does happen. When I have done it with clients, it's very often been in professional services. It's been management consultancies, law firms, and accountancy firms where there isn't a big branding and consumer agency clumping around doing that. And therefore, there is a space for someone to come in and help that conversation. And people are huge to those businesses. People are our most important asset is actually true for them. They don't have any other assets. They've got some computers and a bunch of clever people. So consultancies and similar sort of advisory businesses, that's where, but I also think this is something that's changed during the course of my career. 10 years ago, I wasn't invited into those meetings. Very rarely met the CEO. Now I'd say it's more often than not, I'm speaking to the CEO as part of one of these projects. Yeah, I mean, I'd say comfortably. So it's possibly just, since you left agencies, James, I think the world has changed a little.
Also, let's be fair. 5 years ago, you didn't have the title you have now, and you didn't have the book of work to say, look at all these companies I've helped to support that. So in the same way as the executive remembers a time when it was more fun and now there are more boring meetings, you are also more boring meetings, but they happen to be with more important people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but,
this meeting notwithstanding, because that's not true.
No, but these become really fundamentally interesting questions because you're talking to someone who runs a business and says, "Where's your industry going? Where do you plan to be within that industry? Are you trying to maintain the position you've got? Are you going somewhere different? Why is your industry going to grow or shrink?" And these are really interesting discussions, but all of them have implications for who you should hire and what you should say to them. They're totally legitimate questions for you to be asking. And very often, no one's written it down. So you have to go and speak to the leadership. No one else is going to be able to give you that information.
Yeah.
But you're always, even in this top-down approach, if you do this top-down world, at some point, you're still going to have to say, right, we've got an idea what it looks like. Now we have to go and show it to some real people.
We got to make it real.
Because so far, it appeals to the senior execs, or at least it's what the senior execs think we should say. And they might be really on the money. Sometimes you have senior execs who absolutely understand the heartbeat of the people who work for them, and sometimes you don't. And you're going to need to create a thing and go and show it to people and say, how does this sound? What if this is attractive? What if this isn't attractive? What if this is sometimes just like completely irrelevant? It's like, yeah, that's probably true, but I'm not in, who cares? Whereas sometimes they will actually push back and go, that we don't believe, and we are never going to believe until it happens. So there's no point you talking about it until you've done it, because we don't. Whereas sometimes they'll go, okay, that's not true now, but actually that does chime with what we heard at last year's town hall and what's happened. Okay, yeah, we'll believe you that you're going there. You can now make that promise because it's credible. Yeah. And it's back to that point of you need to make promises that are credible rather than necessarily true. And a true promise that isn't credible is no good. A credible promise that isn't true yet is absolutely fine.
It's useful.
As long as you're saying honestly, saying this is where we are going, not this is what is true right now. There's nothing immoral or dishonest happening there.
It's a situation of the fiction making you think something and feel something more real than the nonfiction would, which doesn't quite jive.
Completely. But it's. I think it is a sticky one, and for some of you, like, you might start on one of these projects and not quite work out which one you need to do for the first month or two. You might be going, should we be doing bottom up? Should we be doing top down? And you might need to sound things out to realise where you're going. And you might need to go to your own bosses and the people directly above you in the hierarchy, because they might know things you don't. And they might know about a change that's coming that you haven't been told about because you're not also at that level yet. So it's a good conversation to have with them, though, and say,
but what?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, literally ask your HRD or whoever, the most senior person you regularly interact with, do you want me to codify how things are now or how things should be? Yeah. And that is a useful question to ask your senior stakeholders, because if you do the wrong one, they won't approve it.
No, totally. Though I find that in-house people tend to be put into positions where that structural framework and structural framework of thought has already been mapped out for them before the employer brander showed up. And I think that's unfair. Usually you're like, hey, we've already decided this is a top-down, that the CEO is going to write the employer brand. And I have a friend of mine, and I will not name names because this is revealing too much, but they were interviewing for a company, a well-known company, and they said, we want you to be our employer brand owner. And she's incredibly successful, and she's worked for a number of companies and built their brand from its ground up. And she said, great. How do I build the brand? And they said, we actually have an agency and they're delivering it next week. They hadn't hired her yet. So they were already bringing in. So they were asking her to just kind of move the pieces around to make that brand real rather than develop that brand. There was so much kind of architecture around what that job was supposed to be, and it was a bad fit. It was never going to work. Very often in-house people are just said, we think we know better about employer brand than you do, which isn't always the case. And we've kind of set things up so this is the direction you're going to go. And it's very hard to kind of buck that pre-existing architecture around what the job and what the deliverable is going to be.
Yeah. And I guess, even if it's not another agency, some of you are going to have that where you've succeeded someone in role and the person in role got the project done and then left. Because it is a time when people leave jobs, right? If you've been doing a big all-consuming project, it comes to an end. That's very often the point at which you go, and I'm done, right, go somewhere else, or, go off and have a career break or something like that. You do get people leaving, not because anything went horribly wrong, but just because it finished and it felt like a good time to do it. And you then come in and you have to pick up this thing that someone else made, and it might be really good, and it might not be, and how are you going to handle that? And you can always nudge it. You can always improve it. You might have to do so very carefully and very tactfully, finding out how do people feel about this, and can I move it tactfully without upsetting anyone? And I've certainly had to do projects where I've been working on a new EVP with one of my stakeholder group being the person who did it last time. And you have to very carefully kind of show some respect to what they did before, but explain why something different needs to happen now, because that person instinctively knows what they think the right answer is. It's on a piece of paper over there.
They worked on it last year. They built it. It's good to go.
Well, exactly. So unless there is a good reason that you can put forward and float about why things have moved on, because it's not really a sensible starting point to say, so when you got that wrong, you've immediately kind of alienated that person, and that's not a very good idea.
Though in employer brand, there tends to be two different flavors of work. There is the builder of brands, and there are managers of brands. I tend to be in the first camp and not the second camp, but I know people who are incredibly good at being in that second camp, and it's great to kind of hang out with them and kind of see their approach to it. But I don't think people who hire employer branders can see the difference between those two people. I look very similar to that other person who is also an employer brand expert, even though they literally have never built a brand. They wouldn't know where to start. And all I do is, once I built it and kind of launch it, bye. I don't want to talk. You figure it out. I'll train you, but I'm out.
What's the secret ingredient in a great career site? It isn't the photo or the headline. It's not the layout or the features. The secret to a great career site is that it is based on a strategy, one that takes advantage of a company's unique resources and presents it in a compelling package. Are you getting the strategy you need to build a great career site from your employer brand or recruitment marketing agency? If you'd like to learn more about how a strategy-focused approach leads to a better career site, check out the award-winning work from ThirtyThree, with offices in New York, London, and Bristol.
I mean, a while ago, I remember years ago being very flattered. I'd done an EVP for a client, and then they said, "Oh, would you be interested in coming and moving in house with us?" And I sort of said to them, "I'd be useless to you. The
Yeah,
reason I was a good builder is I'd be a nightmare for you because I'd want to
yeah,
run around and do things at headlong pace. And actually, the bit where that needed to happen is done now.
yeah,
You need a different person who's a lot more patient and a lot more kind of a whole different sort of personality type to
totally.
do the next bit well, and that's definitely not me.
Yeah,
It could be someone else. It could be someone else from an agency background, but
sure.
actually it doesn't have to be. And that's where you've got a lot more people who are very experienced at moving around in house from role to role, picking up an employer brand that has been created and maximizing it and doing clever things with it and building on it. And that's a brilliant skill set, but not one
Yeah.
I have. It's
Yeah, and there are such different skill sets to employer
yes,
branding, and I have one or two of them, and I definitely don't have one or two or three or
completely.
five of them. I know people who are incredibly successful not because they can build a brand or because they can
Yeah,
kind of structural strategize it, but because they're so good at maneuvering the politics of an organization that
completely.
everybody just wants to follow them and say, "That's a great idea. Let's go do that." I got to bang a drum and wear a chicken outfit half the time to get people to pay attention to the work I'm doing because I'm
Yeah.
so focused on what is the brand and how is this going to work. And
Yes.
that doesn't even take into consideration the management, the overarching development, the implementation, the localization. There's so many parts to this. And yeah, and I do
100%.
that think that does inform what the job is, what the expectations are from clients and employers about what this thing is going to do. And I
Yeah.
think, at some point in a future episode, we can talk about the career pathing or at least the different jobs inside of employer branding. That might be a very interesting kind of topic of conversation.
I think you just said a word there, though, that I think brings up another important topic about when you're thinking about this top-down or bottom-up thing, which is the localization word. And this is really germane to like which way you're going to go about this and what are the implications of it.
Yeah.
If you work for a very big, diverse business, doing the bottom-up thing is very slow and very painful,
Yes.
and involves multiple different languages and might involve a lot of cost, and it can get very complex to crowdsource from 42 different cultures in 18 different languages. And how are you actually physically going to do that? And it's very slow. It's
Hmm.
hard, and it can be done. And I've certainly been part of projects where we have done that, but it becomes logistically very difficult. Whereas the top-down one tends to be easier at very big organisations. It also then depends, what are you working towards? Are you working towards an EVP that everybody must stick to very rigidly?
Yeah.
Or are you not? Actually, in reality, you're going to end up with what I've started to call with a lot of clients. I've started to call this thing an agile EVP, which is we'll get as far as defining the big ideas
Yeah.
and then stop. And then every localized area can then work out how to execute those big ideas. And they have a lot of freedom within that framework. In which case, you don't need to do the crowdsourcing thing early on. You can get that framework, that top level agile EVP together very, very quickly with the leadership.
Yeah.
And then allow, Germany can talk about this theme in this language, and Austria can talk about it in that language, and Switzerland can talk about it. They're all in German, but they can use a different word for collaboration if they like, because they can use the one that works best in their context. And so if it's going to be a less pedantic framework, actually top down works very well because you can get to that common core very, very fast.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing bottom up across a big footprint or across lots of different business units, it can be really difficult to spot those
Yeah.
common threads and tease it out, because you might be dealing with 50 focus groups worth of data and a survey of 8,000 people, and it becomes really difficult to do the crowdsourcing thing, just from a sort of logistical data processing point of view.
Yeah.
Although AI can help,
Yeah.
and there are language
What?
processing programs that can help you
Don't
do
don't
this.
don't give away all our secrets. Come on.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
there are some really pragmatic reasons that might make you go, right, how are we going to go about doing this from a practical point of view? Because bottom up can be quite slow and expensive versus top down, which does have the advantage of speed and decisiveness.
I take it another step further and say the bottom up, especially in larger organizations, the challenge is fighting the mushy middle. It's
Yeah.
what's a thing that we can all kind of agree on? Well, we can
Yeah,
agree
yeah,
that
yeah.
puppies are cute, the sky is blue, and I guess that's the
Right.
end of that
Yeah.
list. I mean, watch people pick pizza toppings, and you'll understand how hard it is to get 100 people, let alone 100,000 people, to agree on things.
Right.
And so you end up on these boring kind of spaces, whereas a top-down approach can say, look, this isn't exactly right. This is a little unconventional. This is a little imperfect, but this is singular. And that is
Yeah.
interesting. And for people like us, way easier to turn into things, way easier to activate than we're having to worry about how do I make 100,000 people happy, which is impossible, versus how do I take this singular idea from someone who clearly is going to be happy when I take it and run with it? How do I connect the dot downward?
Completely. But also, I think there's a really important thing in there about, are you going to try to create a thing that pleases everyone, in which case, bad luck, you're going to fail?
Yep.
Or are you going to try and create something in which there are things that please everyone?
Yes.
That is a lot more doable. And I think that's where some people go wrong with EVP models, is they go, oh, someone didn't like this thing in pillar 1 sentence
Get rid of it.
so we have to take it out. I'm like, no.
No,
It's
no,
okay
it's the
if
good
they
stuff.
didn't love that sentence. Was there another bit that they went, yeah, but that is why I work here?
Yeah.
That's okay, because you cannot possibly come up with a wording that speaks equally to everyone. There's a wonderful thing in I read a while ago. It was actually, I ran across it through a Malcolm Gladwell podcast where he talks about I think it's pasta sauce in the US, and this guy who'd done some
I know
testing.
exactly what you're talking about.
You know the
that was
story?
a great article. Yes.
But it's a really interesting. So for people who haven't heard this story together, and James, correct me if I get the details wrong. There was a guy who was basically he was a product testing guy, and he'd done all sorts of things. So I think he did Diet Pepsi, about how much sugar there should be in Diet Pepsi. And when he got the data back, of course, it turned out lots of people like different amounts of sugar in Diet Pepsi. And then years later, he was employed by a spaghetti sauce or pasta sauce company to work out what is the best pasta sauce to have. And he looked at the data and eventually said, there isn't one, actually. There are three. Some people like it plain, some people like it spicy, and some people like it chunky. And actually, if we make all three, we can please everyone. And I took this story really to heart, because I think it applies completely to employer branding. Is how do you become an employer of choice to everybody? Is actually, you need to be an employer of choices. You need to be this kind of person for this kind of people, this kind of person for this kind of company for these kinds of people. And if you're a company, you can be more than one thing. That's okay. What you can't try and do is, what is the stuff that we say that everybody finds palatable?
Yeah.
Because you'll end up with something incredibly bland.
Now, the other side of that article was, if you remember, ketchup. There is a particular kind of ketchup where everybody goes, that's ketchup. And even tiny deviations make people go, oh. Like my wife, to not bring in personal stuff, like when restaurants go, and this is our homemade, house-made ketchup, you're like, get it out of here. Bring the bottle. We all are expecting, we know. And ketchup is one of those things where there is a singular idea and everybody gets it. So I await you feel free to await our co-written article, The Employer Brand Ketchup versus Spaghetti Sauce Debate. That'll be a barn burner.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a bonkers idea when you sit down and go, why should people work for our company?
Yeah.
Because obviously the answer can't be one thing, and obviously the reason some people are joining you is going to be slightly different from the reason other people are joining you. But what you can't do is create the ultimate answer that works for everyone. What you can do is create the toolkit of answers that are true of your business, but bits of it are more appealing to some groups than others. And however you choose to structure that is fine. A lot of people find the easiest way to do it is through some kind of pillar structure, and maybe they do target value propositions, which this is the one aimed towards early talent, and this is the one aimed towards kind of mid-career technologists. You can end up tying yourself in knots trying to do too many of them. But you're going to need to end up with something that has some flex within it. Mm-hmm. And actually, the more flex it's got, the less you need to worry about someone didn't like this word. That's fine, because it's got plenty of flex within it. Sometimes we're not going to use that word.
And because the added ingredient that we're not talking about, we talked about it earlier, but we need to remind here, is time.
Yeah.
Right. Just because this is what you like today, that doesn't mean that's what you're going to like tomorrow. And as your workforce evolves, as your company evolves, there needs to be wiggle room to say, I showed up for X, I stay for Y. That is where that kind of multifaceted approach to your brand really pays off, because people can come in through different doors, but then find different other reasons to kind of linger and hang out and be there for a long time.
Complete. I mean, for most of you, things are going to change within a 5-year time frame. Right? Your business
5?
I mean, quicker than that. But your business is going to have changed size significantly. It's going to have changed leadership significantly. Like, there's an awful lot of you can look at it. And the easiest way to test this is look back 5 years. how different are you now from where you were 5 years ago?
Yes.
Let's assume that there's going to be that level of change again. Now, okay, we had a global pandemic in that, but we don't know if there could be another one, right? It is entirely on the cards that we have another one. So
Yep.
you can't ignore that possibility. But look back 5 years and go, how different are we from them? And if the answer is we're very, very different, okay, you need to build something that is ready to change.
Yes.
There is no
Modular,
point building
flexible.
something.
Yeah.
Exactly. You don't want to build something robust because something
Or
robust
rigid.
is going to be out of date within 3 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or before you even finish the project sometimes.
Yeah.
I've known some people spend 2 years creating their EVP. And I go, that sounds really rigorous. But what it
Yeah.
actually means is it was out of date before you launched it.
Totally.
Because the first bit of research you did isn't, we can already see reasons why it's not right anymore because your
Yeah.
business has changed in 2 years. So you can't have a process that takes 2 years unless you're a very unchanging business. And there are some unchanging organizations out there, like particularly governmental institutions tend to
Banks.
change less. Yeah, there are some particularly regulated businesses where
Yes.
change happens slower,
Yeah.
and therefore it might be okay. But there are others of you where you'll go, no, we're in an industry that changes so quickly. I mean, certainly advertising is a good example. If we codified everything too heavily, it'll be wrong because advertising is going to change. It's definitely, I can absolutely guarantee you that in 5 years' time, 33 will have at least 5 people with job titles that I've never heard of now.
Yeah.
Because that's how our industry changes, and it's very quick. I'm sure you remember this, right? So there is no point us building anything very robust because it would be wrong quite quickly.
Yeah.
But some of you, that isn't true. You can have a slightly longer timeline.
When I'm dealing with smaller companies, startup type companies, I tend to approach it in terms of an iterative brand. It's like, look, this is going to be useful now. Like one of the big kind of bugbears I fight is the sense of employer brand, the value you won't see for 5 years. Like that tends to be this through line of thought. And I'm like, oh, that's such a cop out. That's such a great way to charge people for work that you're like, please don't measure it. Gotta go.
Yeah.
And it'll be great in 5 years. I'm sure I'll be around then to help you then. And they take off and there's like a U-shaped hole in the wall.
Yes.
I'm a big believer that iterative brand makes sense, that there's enough branding direction you can apply very quickly to make your job postings a little better, to connect with your career site, just minor changes in language, minor changes in framework. And as you get better and you go, oh, this plays, this doesn't play. Oh, I feel real comfortable with that. Ooh, we attracted a certain kind of people by saying this. The iterative process tells you the brand should move in this direction. And so it's not so much a top down, bottom up. It's simply the iterative process says I'm reacting to decisions being made.
Yes.
Looking at the evidence, looking at the result and saying, there's adjustments that can be made, or you know what? We found it, double down, triple down, let's go deep, let's go make this happen.
But this is where, some of you are going to be constrained by the culture of the business in which you work. So some companies are very comfortable with iterative processes. So, I've just done an EVP for a global technology consultancy firm. They're very comfortable with iterative processes. That's kind of how they live and breathe. That's the kind of work they do. Well, yeah, exactly. So the idea of I've done this thing, but it's not particularly pedantic because actually we're going to want to keep on iterating it and changing it. Yeah, sure, of course, absolutely, tick, 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 fine. Others of you work in businesses that are very different to that and have a culture of things must be rigorous and robust and test. If you work in retail banking, right, it's typically there is for very good reasons a lot of process and a lot of codification and writing things down. They're going to be less comfortable with that culturally as a business. So if you come to them with this idea of, hey, it'll all be agile and flexible, but it's fine and we'll bit of trial and error. No, there are some businesses that should not have trial and error. Trial and error is a bad thing in some. Move fast and break things is wonderful in tech, and it's not wonderful in other sectors.
Though I will say. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a bad idea. But it's interesting though, in companies where there's this kind of move fast and agile framework of thought, and I'm not specifically talking about Meta in any particular way, but what happens is as companies get big, it's the communication channels and the rigor around the communication channels that almost dictate the speed of change. So if you've got a company where everybody's super autonomous and people can make lots of change, saying, I sent the email, I sent the Slack, everybody gets it. It's like, no, you gotta plan for 3 months of messaging before people go, oh, there was a policy change in vacation planning? Got it. Like it takes forever because everybody's all around. It's super, super messy. Whereas in a company, whether it's tech or not tech, where When the CEO says X, everybody goes, got it, and they do it. Well, shoot, you can change 12 times a day knowing that everybody's working in lockstep because the communication channels are so well embedded and used.
Definitely. But actually, again, that triggers another useful thought about the top-down, bottom-up thing, which is, let's
Look
talk
at you
about...
keeping us back on topic. You just keep bringing it back. It's great.
No, but if you think about that leadership population and their involvement in the process, that can be quite critical in terms of getting credibility for this thing. If we're going to tell everyone, we need you to say this in job ads, we need you to say this at job interviews, we need everybody on board here, that's kind of easier if the CEO is personally saying that, or the founder, or someone they have heard of. It's a lot harder if that comes from someone they've never heard of.
The recruiter.
And even worse, someone they've never heard of with a job title they don't even understand what it is. You're really going to struggle to get that one in certain business. Other businesses you won't. So it's kind of like that again can be. So sometimes with businesses, one of the reasons we've done a top-down approach is to give it some credibility. Is this comes from the leadership of this business, this is where we're going. It immediately has some credibility. Whether people like it or not is then a different thing, but it's not something that came out of HR or something that was done by someone quite junior. Whereas, the counter argument is, actually, if you've got a very strong culture of people who really feel like they belong together, the kind of company where they've come up with their own adjective is, we are the, so I suppose people at IBM might describe themselves as IBMers, and they've got a name for themselves, and there's quite a sort of name, right? So actually, there's a strength there for saying this came from your colleagues because we know you like your colleagues.
Yeah.
But some businesses that's not true, and they don't have that sense of identity, and particularly things like very distributed businesses like retailers, where I don't know the people in the other stores. I don't know if I like them. I don't know if they're like me. I've never met them. I've never interacted with them.
The only time I hear from them is when they're complaining or they need something from me, and they're paying.
Exactly. So you don't have that camaraderie across your business. So actually saying it's crowdsourced isn't giving it any credibility, because I don't know the other people who work at my business. I've never interacted with them. I don't know that that's a good thing if you've asked everyone else this. So you've got to think through that bit as well, is what's actually going to give this thing more credibility? Is it coming from the top, or is it coming from their peers? Do you have any sense of how much they like their peers? Do you have any sense of how much they like the leadership? Or, that's worth thinking through, because it might change how you go about it. It certainly might change how you go about positioning it when you launch it, and however you decide. I think we should certainly do another episode on how do you launch one of these, because that's a big topic.
That is a big
topic.
topic.
You launch one of these?
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Well, that of course is a perfect segue to ending this week. Thanks so much, Marcus. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise. It's a good topic. Well thought of, James.
All right. Well, I'll see you next week.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to The Brand Plan. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd appreciate it if you'd spread the word.